Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Gedling series. This is a small district to the east of Nottingham and it only has 12 of them. Mind you, it's got some belters. Let's take a look. Welcome back to Gedling, people. We've only got 2 left in this particular district of Nottinghamshire and they both have a sort of mining feel to them. It's kind of like rinse and repeat from what we've already seen. However, this one does have a little twist to it as well, which we'll see at the end of this particular episode. Welcome to the parish of Newstead. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Newstead, new site. With just 2 to go in Gedling, today we find ourselves in a type of village we already know a lot about. Do you remember the Annesley episode in the Ashfield series and how that grew up around a coal mine? Here in Newstead, it's pretty much a case of copy, paste, done. Part of the Hidden Valleys area of Nottinghamshire, Newstead, which is sometimes known as Newstead Village to distinguish it from another part of the parish, developed in the 19th century thanks to a colliery on its eastern fringes. Now gone, the remains of the pit have been transformed into a modern industrial estate and a nature reserve, but the village still shows all the signs of what this area used to be like. There are rows of terraces, all built for mine workers, a miners' welfare club, and a couple of religious buildings like a church and 2 chapels. If Newstead is any different to Annesley though, it can at least say it has a railway station, one that's still in use too. Mining was very important here, but Newstead is known better for another reason. If you were to walk 1.5 miles east along a footpath from the old pit, you'd come to a huge house, Newstead Abbey, which was the ancestral home of Lord Byron. We'll be exploring that in this episode too, so come with me and let's see it all here in Newstead. We start on Hazelford Way, a modern industrial estate which is built on what used to be part of Newstead Colliery. The main part of the old mine was further east, but even if you didn't know that, the landscape is a dead giveaway. These artificial hills were likely once slag heaps. Via a short footway, we can get into the village. Straight away, we have rows of brick terraces constructed in the late 19th century by the Newstead Colliery Company to house its workers. These rows were considered functional and basic by their tenants, but at the time, that's really all they needed to be. Initially, there was no place of worship in Newstead, but if they so wished, villagers were able to use the chapel at Newstead Abbey. Eventually, this pair of Wesleyan chapels were provided. There are 2 because they sit either side of the former parish boundary between Newstead and Annesley. As far as education goes, there's been a school here for quite some time, although quite how long I was unable to pin down. Nonetheless, Newstead Primary School was built for the colliery village and it still serves it today. It must be said though, I've never seen quite so many imitation children outside one school. Now we're at what's known as the Triangle, where there's a bus stop. Newstead is served by the Threes, which pass here on their route between Nottingham and Mansfield. There's also a parish notice board on the triangle too. Tick it off folks, Gedling is down to 1. Now, with the success of the mine and a greater need for manpower, the Newstead Colliery Company owners built some newer housing in the mid-1920s. We're coming into that area now. These were better designed, with gardens and a more generous layout. Most of the new miners came from outside Nottinghamshire. Built amongst them was this church, St Mary's. A simple brick building dating from 1928, this has a 2-acre plot set aside for a graveyard. It was designed by the architect Cyril F. W. Hazeldine in the early English Gothic style, with round-headed lancet windows and a large single roof span. I always think when looking at buildings in a former mining area just how dirty they sometimes appear. Coal dust was a problem, it got literally everywhere. The house builders knew this, and that's why most of these properties have their bathrooms on the ground floor, limiting the spread of mineral muck. Okay, so far so good. We've seen most already of the major landmarks here in Newstead. One we haven't yet seen, of course, is the railway station, which we're heading towards. We're sort of heading towards the east, as it were. And most of Newstead Village is basically residential. It's virtually all the houses are sort of that usual pit style that we usually see, the sort of model village style. There are some areas which are new, though. Take these, which you can see behind me. That's an area of infill that's definitely been built a bit more recently. Let's continue. Of course, shops and amenities were provided for mine workers. Back on Tilford Road now, we can see the modern shop and post office. Incorporated into the original terraced grid of 170 houses as corner shops, there would have been more than one in the late 19th century. Eastwards now along Tilford Road to the War Memorial. There are 22 names on this one, 17 from World War I and 5 from World War II. It stands on a patch of grass which I suppose passes for a village green, but it's not really official. From here you can cut back into the newer housing estate via the back of Newstead Miners' Welfare. This little courtyard has a couple of communal buildings. On screen here is a preschool, and the building next door is a youth and community centre. Both were closed because this was early in the morning. Don't be fooled though, Newstead is a thriving village even though its mining days are done. It has several active sports facilities too. Newstead Welfare Bowls Club, for example, organise an annual tournament, this year held on the last day in August. And now we're coming onto Webb Street via another short linkway between the Miners' Welfare and the housing estate to the south of it. This road is named after William Frederick Webb. It's more housing, and this is a mixture of the stuff from the 1920s and some newer infills. There's even some flats along here too, and one house that was a lovely shade of purple. The names in this area reflect either the history of the colliery ownership or the local landed elite. That gives us titles such as Markham, Abbey, Musters, Byron and Fraser. The one exception to that rule is Livingston. That may have been chosen in recollection of Webb's meeting in Africa with the explorer David Livingstone. Housing-wise though, it's more of the same. Perhaps one landmark that sets Newstead apart from its sister mining communities would be its railway station. Newstead was originally opened in 1883 and closed in 1964, but since the mid-1990s it's been back in service. It was the original terminus of the Robin Hood line when it was reopened in 1993. Now though, that has been extended to Mansfield and Worksop. Annesley, just to the north of Newstead, also had a station on this line, but it was never reopened. Newstead generally has hourly services to both Worksop and Nottingham during the week, and a limited Sunday service. Hopping over the line via the level crossing, we're now in the main area once occupied by Newstead Colliery. This pit wheel memorial is a reminder of the days when coal was king here. Newstead was sunk between 1873 and 74 and lasted a long time comparatively speaking. It closed in 1987. Also on Station Avenue is the Newstead Colliery Recreation Ground. If it wasn't for the name, you'd likely never know that this was former pit land. Immaculately kept and mown to within an inch of its life, the grass here is lush and green, the perfect open space for the modern Newstead resident. On the edge of it is the pit. It's a modern pub and bar, but it's also a Grassroots music venue, hosting some of the best intimate gigs in the East Midlands. Opposite that is Northfield Construction. This occupies the rest of the land once taken up by the colliery. And lastly, as we make our way back to the beginning, we pass the Miners' Welfare. This was built along with the newer 1920s housing. Commissioned in 1925, this is the work of architects Warner and Bocock of Sutton in Ashfield. As model villages go in the Nottinghamshire coalfield, Newstead is a great example of how life once was. So yeah, there we go. We're all the way around Newstead Village, almost. I've just got to get myself back to the industrial estate now, which is fairly easy, quite frankly, because from outside the miners' welfare, all you have to do, you've got a couple of choices actually. The way I'm going to go is past Cornerstone House there, which is an angling business of some description. We're going to go down this little street here and along these side streets, and this leads back to the footway and cycleway, which ends up back at the industrial estate where I began, and that will complete the route around what is a typical, quite frankly, Nottinghamshire mining village. However, Newstead has something else of interest, which is out to the east, and it's nothing to do with mining. Leaving Newstead Village behind, we're now heading down a long entrance drive towards one of the UK's grandest and most historic houses. Now normally this sort of thing would be completely unfilmable because this sort of house is usually off limits to the public. However, that's not the case at Newstead Abbey. Formerly an Augustinian priory, which was later converted to a domestic home following the dissolution of the monasteries, Newstead Abbey is open to the public. It does cost you a small fee to enter its grounds, but it's well worth paying that. This place is loaded with history, and it's best known for being the ancestral home of Lord Byron. This is Newstead Abbey, and isn't it just fabulous? This is what gives Newstead its name. It literally means new site, a reference to the founding of the building. Now, despite its name, Newstead was never an abbey. Instead, it was a priory. It began its life as a house of Augustinian canons dedicated to St Mary. It was founded by King Henry II in around 1170 as one of many penances he paid following the murder of Thomas à Becket. In the late 13th century it was rebuilt and extended, and was further extended again 200 years later when the Daughter, Great Hall and Prior's Lodgings were added. Originally, some 13 monks were present here, although there were only 12 at the time of the dissolution. Newstead was surrendered in 1539, and its original 13th century ecclesiastical buildings were largely left to ruin for a while. In 1540, though, Newstead would pass to Sir John Byron after he was granted it by Henry VIII. He began its conversion into a country house, and so began the start of Newstead's association with the Byron family. When people hear the name, they generally only think of one man, the famous and notorious poet George Gordon Byron, the 6th Baron. He inherited Newstead Abbey from his great-uncle when he was just 10 years old. Now that's not a bad start in life, is it? Upon his arrival at Newstead, he was greatly impressed by the estate, but it needed many repairs by that time. His predecessor, William, simply had no money to pay his debts, and so stripped the abbey and the estate of its artistic treasures, furniture, and even its trees. George's view of Newstead became one of romantic ruin, often used as a metaphor for his family's fall from grace. He also never permanently lived here, instead opting to reside with his mother in Southwell. There is a folklore tale which many advocates of the paranormal believe true. Byron had a beloved Newfoundland dog named Boatswain, who died of rabies in 1808. Boatswain was buried at Newstead Abbey, but Byron himself isn't. Throughout his life, he expressed his wish to be buried here, alongside his dog, but instead he lies in the family vault at the Church of St Mary Magdalene in Hucknall. Now, both he and Boatswain are said to wander the grounds as ghosts, and there are several accounts of people spotting them. Perhaps it's a measure of revenge from beyond the grave. This is the upper lake, one of two at the Abbey. When this was dredged in the 18th century, a lectern was discovered. It had been thrown into what was originally the Abbey's fish pond by the monks to save it during the dissolution. Since 1805, it's been at Southwell Minster. Fronting the lake is a little board telling us a bit about Byron and his poetry. He was one of the major figures of the Romantic movement and generally regarded as being among the greatest of English poets. Among his best-known works are the lengthy narratives Don Juan and Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. Close to the lake is a fibromyalgia clinic, but these buildings were originally a mock fort. We'll finish with a modern story, given to me by a subscriber. Singer-songwriter David Essex once played Byron in a West End musical and became a bit obsessed with Newstead Abbey, so much so he wanted to buy it. When he came to have a look around, the Abbey was closed, but somehow he managed to climb over a wall to get in. After being caught by one of the Abbey staff, who recognised him, he was given his own private tour. Despite his efforts though, the council still wouldn't let him buy it. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when we go out as a family, we have a little policy that we always try to stick to, and that is to find things that are cheap or free. And I think for the princely sum of £6, Newstead Abbey is definitely in that bracket. It's definitely in the cheap section, isn't it? It doesn't sound like a lot of money, and to be fair, it's not for one car. So yeah, bring yourself here and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I mean, I've got to move on to the next one, but I would really love to stay a lot longer. I'm actually tempted to come back here in a couple of weeks' time with the whole TVI tribe, and we'll maybe explore it a little bit more. We will see. For now though, that's been the parish of Newstead, and it's time to move on to Gedling's final episode. And that's it for Newstead. Now, of course, there's a lot more to Newstead Abbey than what I've shown you, but for the princely sum of £6 for the car park, you can explore the place yourself. In fact, I'd actively encourage you to do so. Come and visit this historic house, make your own little film, and show us all what you found. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.